It is March 1945. A weary French farmer walking the pre-dawn lanes near the Rhine River squints into the gloom. He sees them, American tanks, hundreds of them, their long barrels pointed menacingly towards Germany. An entire armored division, rumbling and clanking, preparing for the final assault. He feels a surge of hope. But then, as the sun begins to bleed over the horizon, he sees something impossible. 4 American soldiers walk over to a 40-ton M4 Sherman tank, lift it effortlessly, and turn it around. The farmer blinks, convinced the strain of war has finally broken his mind. He is not going mad. He is witnessing a performance, a grand illusion, and the strangest, most creative weapon of World War II, the Ghost Army. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret its existence was classified for more than 50 years after the war. It was an army of artists, actors, sound engineers, and architects, recruited from the finest institutions in America. Their mission was not to fight with bullets, but with imagination. They wielded inflatable tanks, sonic deception, and theatrical subterfuge to fool the German high command on the battlefields of Europe. They were a traveling roadshow of war, using creativity to save thousands of lives by drawing enemy fire to themselves, convincing the Nazis that a powerful American force was present where, in reality, there was only air, rubber, and meticulously crafted lies. This is the story of how 1,100 men tricked the Third Reich, armed with nothing more than their wits and a bizarre collection of props that would have been more at home on a Hollywood movie set than on the front lines of the deadliest conflict in human history. Part 1. The birth of an idea. The concept of military deception is as old as warfare itself. From the Trojan horse to the feigned retreats of Genghis Khan, fooling an enemy has always been a potent strategy. But in the mechanized, total warfare of the 20th century, deception had to evolve. The British, masters of espionage and cunning, had already proven its worth in North Africa. During the pivotal Second Battle of El Alamein in 1942, they executed Operation Bertram, a massive deception that used dummy tanks, fake supply dumps, and a disguised pipeline to mislead Erwin Rommel's Panzer Army about the timing and location of the Allied attack. It was a stunning success. Across the Atlantic, a few forward-thinking officers in the United States military were paying close attention. Men like Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, a former managing editor of Time magazine, believed that America needed its own dedicated deception unit. They argued that if an enemy could be made to shoot at a fake army, real soldiers wouldn't get shot. If a German panzer division could be lured into chasing ghosts, a real American infantry division could advance unopposed. It was a simple, elegant, and life-saving equation. The challenge was immense. How do you create a convincing illusion of a 30,000-man division with only 1,000 men? The answer was multisensory. You couldn't just show the enemy an army, they had to hear it and believe it was there. This required a unique blend of talent. The Pentagon sent out a quiet, unusual call for recruitment. They weren't looking for sharpshooters or brawlers. They were looking for artists from the Pratt Institute in New York, sound technicians from RCA, architects, set designers from Broadway, and actors. Young men who had been sketching landscapes or designing buildings found themselves being interviewed for a top-secret military project. They were asked bizarre questions about their knowledge of camouflage, their ability to think creatively under pressure, and their knack for improvisation. Among the recruits were names that would later become famous in the art and design world: fashion designer Bill Blass, minimalist painter Ellsworth Kelly, wildlife artist Arthur Singer, and photographer Art Kane.
But in 1944, they were just young GIs trading their paintbrushes and T-squares for the strangest arsenal ever assembled. They were brought to Army bases in the United States like Camp Forest, Tennessee, and Pine Camp, New York, for training. They were taught the basics of being a soldier, but their real curriculum was far more esoteric. They studied the German order of battle, learning to identify enemy units and understand their command structure. More importantly, they studied their own army. They had to know exactly what an armored division looked like, how it moved, how many tanks and trucks it had, what its divisional patch was, and most crucially, what it sounded like. Their unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, was officially activated in January 1944 at Pine Camp. It was composed of several distinct but interconnected parts, each a crucial piece of the overall illusion. The 603rd Camouflage Engineering Battalion was the visual heart of the operation. These were the artists and designers tasked with creating the physical illusion of an army. Their primary tool was the inflatable decoy. Working with rubber companies like Goodyear and Firestone, they developed an astonishingly realistic full-size inflatable M4 Sherman tank, M10 tank destroyer, 155mm howitzers, and GMC trucks. Made of vulcanized rubber and inflated with air compressors, a 40-ton tank only weighed 93 pounds. 4 men could easily lift one and place it in a field. From the air or from a few hundred yards away, they were indistinguishable from the real thing. The artists of the 603rd became masters of detail, ensuring each dummy had meticulously painted markings and even created fake tracks in the dirt around them to complete the illusion of weight and presence. The second component was the Signal Company Special. This unit was responsible for sonic deception and spoof radio. Their weapon was a collection of massive speakers mounted on half-tracks. They had traveled to Fort Knox to make high-fidelity recordings of every sound a military unit could make. The clatter of tank treads, the shouts of soldiers assembling a pontoon bridge, the rumble of truck convoys, the whine of artillery shells. These sounds were recorded on state-of-the-art wire recorders, a precursor to magnetic tape, and then mixed by sound engineers into elaborate hour-long scripts of deception. In the dead of night, these trucks could pull up near the front lines and project their auditory illusions up to 15 miles, convincing German sound-ranging equipment and listening posts that an entire division was on the move. Meanwhile, their radio operators would mimic the communication patterns of a real unit, sending out streams of fake, coded messages to fill the airwaves and deceive German intelligence.
The final piece of the puzzle was pure theater. Soldiers from the 23rd would drive into nearby French towns wearing the shoulder patches of the division they were impersonating. They would visit cafes and bars, talking loudly about their upcoming attack. They would set up fake command posts, complete with convincing-looking generals, actors in costume, and jeeps with the correct bumper markings driving in and out. This special effects branch created the human element, the believable buzz of activity that sold the entire deception. Combined, these three elements, visual, sonic, and theatrical, created a powerful, multi-layered illusion. They were not just a ghost army, they were a phantom orchestra. And they were about to take their show on the road to the European theater of operations. Part 2, the Normandy Deception and the Traveling Roadshow. Just weeks after the D-Day landings in Normandy, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops arrived in France. The Allied forces had secured a beachhead but were struggling to break out into the French interior. Every division was critical, and the front lines were a fluid, dangerous place. The Ghost Army was about to receive its baptism by fire. Their first major missions were part of the broader effort to secure the Brittany Peninsula, particularly the vital port of Brest. The Allies needed every man they could get for the main push towards Germany, so the Ghost Army was called in to plug the gaps. One of their earliest operations, codenamed Operation Elephant, took place in August 1944. The goal was to convince the Germans that the U.S. 6th Armored Division was moving towards Brest to lay siege, when in reality, the actual division was secretly moving east to join General Patton's 3rd Army. It was a classic switch and catch. The men of the 23rd went to work. Near the town of Plabenik, under the cover of darkness, the 603rd Engineering Battalion inflated their rubber armada. By morning, a vast collection of Sherman tanks and artillery pieces dotted the landscape. The signal company began broadcasting the sounds of an armored division preparing for an assault, the roar of engines, the clanking of treads, and the shouts of mechanics. Radio operators began transmitting fake traffic, mimicking the call signs and chatter of the 6th Armored. Meanwhile, a few trucks with the 6th Armored's insignia would drive in a large loop, disappearing behind a hill and circling back to create the illusion of a continuous convoy. The German reconnaissance planes that flew overhead saw exactly what they were supposed to see, a powerful American force digging in for a fight. German artillery, which could have been used elsewhere, began to shell the phantom positions. The Ghost Army had successfully held a sector of the front line, allowing the real 6th Armored to slip away undetected. For the men of the 23rd, it was a terrifying and exhilarating experience. They were drawing real enemy fire. A single piece of shrapnel could kill an entire platoon of their inflatable tanks, but it could just as easily kill one of them. Their casualty rate was low, but the danger was constant. They were a small unit, often spread out over miles of terrain and always deliberately positioned in dangerous, exposed locations to attract enemy attention. Throughout the late summer and fall of 1944, the Ghost Army became a traveling roadshow of deception, moving up and down the front lines in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. They impersonated over 20 different U.S. divisions, sometimes simulating a unit twice their size. Their playbook was refined with each operation. They learned to be meticulous. If they were impersonating the 75th Infantry Division, every soldier had to have the correct patch sewn onto his uniform. The bumpers on their jeeps and trucks had to be stenciled with the 75th's markings. They would even research the commander of the 75th and have one of their men, chosen for a passing resemblance, drive around in a command jeep.
One of their most critical deceptions came during the bloody Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division had been decimated in the fighting and needed to be pulled off the line for rest and reinforcement. But their absence would leave a dangerous 7-mile gap in the American lines. The 23rd was called in to fill it. For an entire week, 1,100 men pretended to be a full-strength division of 15,000. They drove their sound trucks up and down the line at night, broadcasting the sounds of patrols and vehicle movements. During the day, they set up dummy artillery positions and a handful of real artillery pieces to fire just enough rounds to seem credible. They used their theatrical skills to create the illusion of a busy headquarters. The Germans, listening from just across the river, were completely fooled. They reported the continued presence of the 9th Division, never knowing that the line was being held by a skeleton crew of artists and engineers. The real 9th Division was able to pull back and refit without the enemy ever knowing the line was vulnerable. It was a high-wire act that saved countless lives. The soldiers of the 23rd lived a surreal double life. By night, they were on the front lines, conducting complex deceptions under the threat of enemy shelling. By day, many of them returned to their true calling. Bill Blass, Ellsworth Kelly, and the other artists in the unit would take out their sketch pads and watercolors and paint the French countryside, the bombed-out churches, and portraits of their fellow soldiers. It was their way of processing the war and holding on to their identities. They were artists in uniform, fighting a war with charcoal and canvas as much as with camouflage and speakers. As the Allies pushed towards the German border, the stakes grew higher. The Ghost Army was about to face its greatest test and perform its most audacious illusion, the crossing of the Rhine River. Part 3. The Grand Finale, Operation Viersen. By March 1945, the Allied armies stood at the banks of the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier protecting the heart of Germany. Crossing it would be a monumental and perilous undertaking. The German High Command knew this and had fortified their side of the river, ready to inflict massive casualties on any crossing attempt. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division was tasked with making a major crossing near the town of Rheinberg. To succeed, they needed a powerful diversion. They needed to convince the Germans to look the other way, just for a moment. They needed the Ghost Army. The mission, codenamed Operation Viersen, was the largest and most ambitious deception the 23rd would ever attempt. Their objective was to simulate two entire U.S. infantry divisions, the 30th and the 79th, a force of over 40,000 men, and convince the Germans that they were preparing to cross the Rhine River about 10 miles south of the actual crossing point. The goal was to draw the German reserves, particularly the formidable panzer divisions, to the wrong place at the wrong time. The performance began on the night of March 18th. The 23rd moved into position along a 10-mile stretch of the front. This time, they had more than just their own bag of tricks. They were given control of real artillery battalions and a company of tanks to mix in with their dummies, blurring the line between illusion and reality. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers went to work on an epic scale. They deployed over 600 inflatable tanks, cannons, and vehicles. They created fake airfields with inflatable planes. They built fake motor pools and supply dumps. During the day, they would deliberately allow German reconnaissance planes to spot their buildup. At night, they would move the decoys around to simulate the constant movement of a massive force. The sonic deception was their masterpiece. The signal company set up their powerful speakers and for days on end played their symphony of war. They had a script that simulated the entire process of a division preparing for a river crossing. First came the sounds of bulldozers and engineering crews clearing roads and preparing the riverbank. Then came the sounds of pontoon trucks arriving, followed by the distinctive clanking and hammering of a pontoon bridge being built under the cover of darkness. This was a sound the Germans knew well and feared. To make it even more realistic, the American artillery that was attached to the 23rd would fire intermittently through the night, providing a canopy of noise to cover the sonic broadcast. The theatrical element was in full swing. Men wearing the patches of the 30th and 79th Divisions were everywhere. They established dozens of fake headquarters in the surrounding towns. Military police were dispatched to direct non-existent traffic. Radio operators sent out a constant stream of messages discussing troop movements, supply needs, and the impending jump-off for the river crossing. Every detail was designed to create an overwhelming and convincing picture of a massive assault in the making. For the German commanders on the other side of the Rhine, the evidence was undeniable. Their listening posts picked up the sounds of a huge American force. Their aerial reconnaissance photos showed hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces. Their radio intercepts confirmed the presence of two full divisions. They had no idea the tanks were made of rubber, and the bridge building was a recording. The deception worked more perfectly than anyone could have imagined. As the men of the 23rd continued their elaborate performance, the German High Command took the bait. They began to move their forces, including two of their most powerful divisions, away from the 9th Army's actual crossing point and towards the Phantom Army. They redirected artillery and reinforced their defenses directly opposite the Ghost Army's position. Then, on the night of March 23rd, while German guns were aimed at empty fields full of rubber tanks, the real U.S. 9th Army launched its assault, Operation Flashpoint, 10 miles to the north. They crossed the Rhine against far lighter opposition than they would have otherwise. The crossing was a swift and resounding success, with casualties far lower than Allied planners had dared to hope for. The Ghost Army had held the attention of an entire German Army Corps, while the real blow fell elsewhere. They had saved perhaps thousands of American lives. It was their finest hour, the culmination of everything they had learned and practiced. After the real crossing was secured, the 23rd simply packed up their inflatable tanks, turned off their speakers,
and vanished, leaving the Germans to stare in disbelief at an empty battlefield. Epilogue: The Unveiling of Ghosts. After Operation Viersen, the war in Europe quickly wound down. The Ghost Army conducted a few more minor deceptions, but their main work was done. When VE Day arrived, the men of the 23rd celebrated like every other soldier, but with a strange sense of unreality. Their contributions were invisible, their victories unrecorded in the daily dispatches. They were ordered back to the United States, and upon their arrival, the unit was swiftly and quietly disbanded. Each soldier was made to sign a non-disclosure agreement, swearing them to secrecy. The story of the Ghost Army, their inflatable tanks, their soundscapes of war, their grand illusions, was immediately classified as top secret. The official records were locked away. The men went home and resumed their lives. Bill Blass built a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly became a celebrated painter. Art Kane became a legendary photographer. They built careers and families, and they kept their promise. They never spoke about what they really did in the war. When their children and grandchildren asked what they did, they would simply say they were in an engineering unit or a signal company. The true, incredible story remained their silent, shared secret. For over 50 years, the ghosts remained in the shadows. But in the mid-1990s, the U.S. government finally declassified the records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Slowly, the story began to emerge. Historians and documentary filmmakers, piecing together the newly available information and interviewing the handful of surviving veterans, were astonished. The story sounded like something out of a Hollywood script, yet it was all true. The surviving members of the Ghost Army, now in their 70s and 80s, were finally able to share their stories. They spoke of the fear and the excitement, the absurdity of inflating a tank on the front line, and the immense pride they felt in knowing their creativity had saved the lives of their fellow soldiers. Recognition, though late, finally came. Books were written, and an award-winning documentary brought their story to a wider audience. In 2022, the United States Congress passed a bill to award the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest civilian honors, in recognition of their unique and invaluable service. The story of the Ghost Army is more than just a fascinating, forgotten chapter of World War II. It is a powerful testament to the force of human ingenuity in the face of conflict. It proves that sometimes the most potent weapon is not a bigger bomb or a faster plane, but a clever idea. It is the story of 1,100 men who waged a war of the mind, who fought with imagination and artistry, and whose legacy is not in the battles